It's been a long 2 years since Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker had their first bout in the octagon back in UFC 243 in 2019, and fans have been begging for more. The two are expected to have a rematch in 2021, but things have taken a turn for the worse, and here's why. First off, the initial match. Israel Adesanya is considered one of the best strikers in the history of the sport, with an undefeated streak up to that point, while Robert Whittaker had been on a mean streak and had won 9 consecutive matches leading up to UFC 243. So there was already a lot of excitement and a lot of money behind their match at that event for the UFC Middleweight Championship, which was held by Whittaker at that time. Adesanya exceeded all expectations during the match and won in the second round at 3 minutes and 33 seconds with a knockout. Both men earned an estimated $400,000 for the match. The match generated a lot of buzz for the new champ, who was 18-0, and many wondered if the two would ever face off again after an embarrassing defeat for Whittaker. Next, what was Whittaker up to since his defeat in 2019? All eyes were on Whittaker on where he would go next after his shocking defeat at UFC 243 against Adesanya. His first fight since the defeat was up against Darren Till, a very successful MMA fighter who had a few setbacks leading up to the fight. At a UFC ESPN special event in Abu Dhabi in July 2020, Whittaker defeated Till with the unanimous decision in a match that lasted all 5 rounds. His next match was up against one of the highest ranked middleweights in the UFC, Jared Cannonier, at UFC 254. Whittaker soundly defeated Cannonier in 3 rounds with a unanimous decision, and it looked like he was finally gaining some momentum again. He was then up against Kelvin Gastelum at another UFC ESPN special event April of this year, and he once again emerged victorious in a fight that ended with a unanimous decision. At this point, Whittaker was once again ranked as the #1 middleweight in the UFC, and his eyes were now only set on one thing: the championship. Now, what was Adesanya up to since the match? Fresh off the momentum of the match while being the newly crowned middleweight championship, in Adesanya's next match, he was up against Yoel Romero, a very talented, freakish fighter in his own right, at UFC 248 in March of 2020. The match lasted all 5 rounds, and Adesanya won in a unanimous decision bout, extending his win streak to 19-0. He was then set to face off against an undefeated Paulo Costa in a streak versus streak match at UFC 253 in Abu Dhabi, and managed to secure a TKO and extend his streak again to 20-0. Adesanya then went up a weight class to light heavyweight and sought to become the first man to hold both the middleweight and the light heavyweight championships at the same time. He faced off against the light heavyweight champion John Blachowicz at UFC 259 in March of 2021, but failed in his attempt, ultimately losing his undefeated streak with a 20-1 record. However, he was still the middleweight champion and successfully defended his title at UFC 263 in June of this year against Marvin Vettori, which was his most recent match. Up next, what did Adesanya say after his match at UFC 263? After successfully defending his title against Marvin Vettori at UFC 263, Adesanya had a few words to say about the #1 ranked middleweight fighter in the UFC. When Joe Rogan asked Adesanya what's next for the champ, Adesanya said his eyes were set on his arch nemesis, Robert Whittaker. He proclaimed himself the king and said he wanted another match with Whittaker, saying, "I knocked him out twice last time. We need to run that back in Auckland," which is unusual for a fighter to say about a person he's already defeated, but we're not complaining. Shortly after the fight, Whittaker took to Twitter to write, "Rest up, see you soon," which confirmed the two were getting ready for another fight. Dana White also confirmed that the fight is in the works, saying, "We'll figure out him and Whittaker ASAP." Fans were ecstatic after the announcement, but unfortunately, we'll have to wait a little bit longer until we actually get to see the rematch. Next up, when is the fight supposed to happen? Promoters were targeting a November 2021 date for Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker 2 to happen at UFC 268 at Madison Square Garden, but both Whittaker, who lives in Australia, and Adesanya, who lives in New Zealand, are currently facing severe travel restrictions due to COVID-19, and it seems like they probably won't be lifted in time for the event at Madison Square Garden. Whittaker's manager said that Rob was willing to fly to New York City for the fight, but he received word from Adesanya's camp that while he'd be able to fly to NYC as well, he wouldn't be able to return to New Zealand right after, making it difficult for him to reschedule the appearance. According to Whittaker's manager, the fight is still on the cards, and it's not a matter of if the two will fight again, but rather when they're going to face off against each other again. As of right now, both Australia and New Zealand are facing severe restrictions due to the COVID crisis in both countries, and things aren't looking too good for free movement anywhere due to the severity of the Delta variant. Holding the match before the end of the year seems to be next to impossible for now, but you can bet your bottom dollar we're we're still excited for whenever it actually happens. Now, what do we do until then? Just because Whittaker versus Adesanya 2 isn't happening anytime soon doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of other exciting things happening in the UFC. The rest of the year is jam-packed with events and fights that none of us want to miss in the slightest, and you might want to start setting your calendars for these fights that are sure to keep you busy until Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker 2 can be sorted out by the organizers. First, we have Charles Oliveira versus Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier is fresh off a win against a man who was once considered the greatest MMA fighter in the world, a la Conor McGregor. Charles Oliveira is no slouch himself. He recently defeated Michael Chandler to finally win the UFC Lightweight Championship at UFC 262 in just 19 seconds into the second round. Poirier is currently the #1 ranked lightweight fighter in the UFC, and he hopes to replicate some of the success he had against Conor McGregor to become the UFC Lightweight Champion. The cards are stacked against Oliveira, who has yet to defend his title even once, and having an opponent like Dustin Poirier as your first defense is probably not too comforting for him. Poirier wants to extend his record for the most submissions in UFC history by making Oliveira submit in their eventual rematch. However, much like Adesanya versus Whittaker, there isn't an official set date for the match yet, but if we know Dana White, he does not want to miss out on a potentially big payday like this before the end of the year, and since these two aren't bound by any major travel restrictions, most people expect this fight to happen before this year ends. Next, we have Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 2. Adesanya isn't the only Nigerian origin fighter in the UFC that has us all impressed. Kamaru Usman is currently the UFC welterweight champion, and he's considered the best welterweight in all of MMA. His upcoming opponent is Colby Covington, the #1 ranked welterweight in UFC right now. The two have already faced off against each other once before at UFC 245, where Usman successfully defended his title against Covington, but this time Covington is looking to finally capture the title and settle the score with Usman. Khabib Nurmagomedov has described the upcoming bout as the hardest fight for Kamaru at welterweight, which raises hope for Covington to finally secure the title, but we'll just have to wait and see. And finally, we have Peter Yan versus Aljamain Sterling 2. Out of all the upcoming fights we mentioned, this is the only one that actually has a date, and it seems like it's one of the most exciting ones that we look forward to. Peter Yan and Aljamain Sterling already had a rather controversial fight against one another at UFC 259. Peter Yan was defending the bantamweight title against Sterling when he hit Sterling with an illegal knee, disqualifying him from the match, leading to Sterling being declared the new UFC bantamweight champion. This made Sterling the only champion in the UFC who won his championship by disqualification, and this is something they both weren't too pleased with. The final match to decide it all will be held at UFC 267 at the Etihad Arena in Abu Dhabi on October 30th, 2021, and we can't wait.